show you how to put the sail onto the spars of a Sailboats to Go sail kit. I'm Jim Luckett, founder and owner of Sailboats to Go. And if you have any problems, you can reach me. Email is jim@sailboatstogo.com. Phone number is 978-263-7598. We have here the halyard, which is the longer, thinner rope that we sent you. The sheet, which is the shorter and thicker rope that we sent you. The sail, as I mentioned. Pulley. And mast slide. So let's unfold the spars, make them into two long poles, just by sliding the ends together. So let's make the first step be parts identification, so that as I use terms going along here, they will have been introduced. First is to distinguish between the two spars. They do have separate names when we need to talk about them individually. Together they're the spars, but individually this one is the boom, and I know that because it has these two holes in it for bolting on the mast slide.
The other spar is called the gaff, or top spar.
This fitting here is called a rope fitting. This fitting here is called a clam cleat. We have the shock cord inside the tubes to keep them organized. And down there, at the front end of the boom and the bottom end of the gaff, we've got a bolt that I call the pivot bolt that bolts them together with a little spacer between them. Here's the mast slide. The mast slide might be shipped with bolts and sheet metal screws. The sheet metal screws are for use on snarks. If you've got a Sailboats to Go sail kit, you don't need those screws. You're going to use the bolts that have nuts. All right, we're ready to begin, I think. So we're going to take 2 wrenches. Perhaps I should say at this point the tools that I have at hand here. 2 7/16" wrenches and a Phillips head screwdriver that's in good condition so it doesn't booger up the screws. So the first thing we're going to do is take the pivot bolt out.
Turning the pivot bolt counterclockwise will help you get it out of the hole.
And we're going to take the spacer off the bolt. All right, those parts we're going to set aside and put them back in at the end of the process. Next step is we're going to take this rope fitting off. So it's hinged so that the two parts come apart like that. And we're going to put that aside for later reinstallation. Now we unwrap the sail. Take it out of its bag. Now the sail has sleeves in it, and the spars are going to go into these sleeves. And you need to identify which is the sleeve for the boom and which is the sleeve for the gaff. And the way we do that is that the boom sleeve has a cutout in it right near the front. This, you see this blunt corner? That's the lower front corner of the sail, called the tack. And if we follow the sleeves out from that lower front blunt corner, we see that there's a great big cutout that you reach very soon on one of them and not on the other. And we pick up the boom, making sure again we've got the boom, it's got the two holes in it, and we slide it into that sleeve. When you're sliding poles in, when you come to a cutout, you're going to have to guide it past the cutout and make sure that it doesn't escape from the sleeve. It's got to re-enter the sleeve at the other side of the cutout.
Always push the spar into the sleeve, never pull it. If you pulled it, it would cause separation in the joints behind it and stretch out the shock cord, and in the extreme you might break the shock cord.
I've braced the back end of the boom against the baseboard, and now I can pull on the sleeve and the boom won't slide away from me.
If you can recruit an assistant, have them hold the empty part of the sleeve out straight in front of the spar as you push it through. That really speeds things up and makes it easier.
Okay, the boom is in, and we see why we have that cutout and why that identifies the boom sleeve, because the holes for the mast slide line up with that first cutout. Now we do the same thing with the gaff. Start at the top of the gaff sleeve and put the bottom of the gaff into it. Just like putting on pants. You start at the top of your pants and you put the bottom of your legs into the top of the pants. It's funny how that works out, huh? Here we go. Both spars are inserted through the sleeves of the sail. The next step is to put the pivot bolt back in, and that's also the beginning of the process of rigging the halyard rope. So I've got my two wrenches, and I've got the pivot bolt and nut. I lay the spars parallel to each other and close together and insert the bolt. Bolt has gone through the boom, and now I'm putting on the spacer. There we go.
Turn the bolt clockwise to make it go through the holes in the spars and through the spacer.
Now the halyard begins to go on. First step, take one end of the halyard, make a loop like that, and tie the loop into a knot to make it permanent. put that over the pivot bolt. Even though the spars aren't threaded, it helps to turn the bolt clockwise as it's going in if it's at all resisting. And put on the washer and the nut. This nut is what's called a nylock nut. It has a nylon ring in it, a friction ring. And the purpose of that is to keep the nut from unscrewing itself. So make sure that you've tightened that nut on enough to bring the end of the bolt all the way through the friction ring. It doesn't have to stick out much, that's a half a millimeter or something, but it is all the way through the friction ring. So now we have this string or cord that's tied into the grommet here at the corner of the sail, and I've tied it on with a double half hitch, or you can just do a double knot, double granny, and then tie that into the loop that you made in the halyard. See what's going on here? Can you get the camera close? We're just using that loop as an anchor point for this corner string. And then make sure the sail is down far enough to expose both bolt holes. And loosely tie this, well, tie it, but know that you're going to come back and probably adjust where that knot ends up. Now we can put the mast slide on. And these bolts are going to encounter some resistance the first time because of that flotation inside, and you need to just drive them right through that flotation. A little wiggling goes a long way for that process. So we've got the mast slide on and the bolts and nuts loosely together. Now I have to use an adjustable because these nuts are smaller. The 7/16 inch won't fit. You could use pliers. And my Phillips head screwdriver. Let's go down to the other end. And make sure all the joints are slid together fully. You can just feel for the joints inside the sleeve and slide them together. We feed the corner string through the cleat here at the end. and then pull it tight and push it down into those teeth. See the teeth here at the back end of the cleat? So that holds it. And the same thing at the top of the gaff. All right.
Now we spread out the sail and spars to check the position of the sail on the spars. Is it too far forward, too far back, or just right?
So this is bad. I'm glad it came out this way to help me emphasize this point. The sail is too far back on the spars, with the result that when I start spreading it out, the whole weight of the boom is going to be on the fabric here. This fabric is getting tight at the front before the fabric is getting tight at the back. So when you see that happen, you need to release the tension from the cleat at the top of the gaff and the back of the boom, and slide the sail forward and down. There, that's good. So now we see that the weight of the boom is going to be carried on the back hem of the sail, and that's what we want.
We moved the sail forward and down. Now when we spread the spars apart, the back hem gets tight before the fabric at the blunt corner up front. That's good.
I'll tell you a sad story. I've had people who don't pay attention to this step of adjusting the position of the sail on the spars, and they've got the sail too far back, and they actually rip the sail here at the front because they put so much stress on the fabric at the front of the sail. So now that we know where the sail needs to be, we'll tighten up this front corner string and tie it, and we're never going to untie that, and that will mean that we don't have to redo this adjustment in the future.
Now it's time to finish rigging the halyard. We've got the halyard anchored there at the pivot bolt with that loop, and we run it along the bottom half of the gaff until we reach the sail cutout. Now if your sail has two cutouts on the gaff, use the second one, the higher one. At this cutout, we wrap the halyard around the gaff once, and then we tie a double knot. And that's all there is to it.
You want this knot to end up at the bottom end of this cutout, so that if there's any stretching, it's still going to keep this well within the cutout. So what does this do? Why do I have this counterintuitive method of rigging the halyard? This is the rope that's going to lift the sail up to the top of the mast. This knot is going to end up at the top of the mast. And remember, this gaff is in sections. We don't want the sections to be pulled apart by the weight of the sail and spars. So this tail on the halyard running down to the pivot bolt transfers that strain down to the bottom end of the lowest section. So now we're lifting the whole sail and spar assembly by the pivot bolt, and there's no tendency to pull apart the sections of the spars as a result.
Next we put a rope fitting on the boom with the sail cut out.
Okay, remember this guy, the rope fitting? Put him around the boom at the cutout. And you might want to put the pulley on. That little rope loop goes over the bolt. And now close him up. And don't worry about the orientation, because remember there's slip joints in here. So that orientation is self-adjusting. Now I need to show you how to fold up the sail at the end of the day. And we'll talk a little bit about your options for rigging the sheet. And why don't we do that second thing first. The sheet is the line that you use to control where the sail is while you're sailing along. And you have many options for how you're going to rig the sheet depending upon your own preferences and the type of boat, the size of boat that you're using it on. If the boat is very long, like, certainly more than 12 feet, 12 feet might be the borderline, you have the option to just make the sheet a direct line from this rope fitting at the end of the boom to your hand. And that'll give you plenty of leverage because you're working from the end of the boom. You've got all that leverage of the length of the boom. But if the boat is shorter, you would be having that tension on the sheet way behind you, and that would be awkward. So that's only an option for very long boats. Another option is just a direct line from this rope fitting at the middle of the boom to your hand, and that'll be fine for light wind days or people with strong arms. Nice and simple.
A third option is to use the pulley at that sail cutout near the middle of the boom. You tie one end of the sheet to something on the boat, run the sheet through the pulley to your hand. That gives you a 2-to-1 mechanical advantage for controlling the sail position.
Then a fourth option would be to get a second pulley and tie that one into the end of the boom, the back end. And now the rigging will go like this. Okay, imagine I've tied that pulley in there. So now I would anchor the back end of the sheet to something on the boat. Maybe there's a stern handle on the boat. Something like that behind you. And the sheet is going to run from that anchor point up to this pulley at the back end of the boom. Then it's going to run along the boom and from there to your hand. Right, this is anchored. The rope is running from an anchor point behind the skipper up to a pulley at the back end of the boom, then along the boom through the second pulley at the roughly middle point of the boom, and from there down to the skipper's hand. The disadvantage of it is when you have that boom go from one side to the other over your head, you have to keep a little tension on the sheet, or else this piece of the sheet is going to sag down and take your hat off or your head off. And the first couple times that happens, you're very frustrated and you say, I'm never going to rig the sheet this way again. But if you develop that habit of just keeping a little tension on the sheet as the sail comes across, then you might make friends with this method. Now let me explain how you use the halyard to raise the sail. I'm indoors, so I can't do it fully, but let's suppose we've got a boat here in the living room, and this mast step is mounted to the boat, right? So we'll take the spar set and sail and mast slide, and we'll lay that right over the mast step. And we'll put the mast in there, and then I can take the top half of the mast off, bend it down, and there's an eye at the top of the mast, and I'll run the halyard through that eye. Got the picture? My arm is the mast, fingers are the eye at the top of the mast, the halyard's running through it. As I pull down on the halyard, it's going to raise the sail. So I raise the sail up by pulling the halyard down and then tie it off to something on the sail kit, like the front crossbar. So other instructions and other videos show that more fully, but I wanted to preview that here. Now let's talk about folding up the sail at the end of the day. We go up here and release the corner string at the top of the gaff. And we'll do the same thing at the back end of the boom. Then we'll go down to the first joint. We know that joint's somewhere in here. So scooge the sail down on the boom to get extra material so that we've got room to pull apart that joint. And I can use the rope fitting here as something to grab onto and slide that apart. And aren't we glad that we put that rope fitting at the front of the cutout so that we've got room to do that. And make sure that you've pulled it apart at least an inch or so, because we don't want to put strain on the sail fabric when we fold it here. We're going to be folding it here, and we want there to be some distance between the spars so that we're not stretching that fabric around a very tight bend. And we'll do the same thing at this next joint. And again, make sure we've pulled it apart an inch or two so that we've got room for that fabric to make that fold without being strained. Same thing with the gaff. Push the sail material down, go down and do the lowest joint in the gaff. And you can step on the boom a little bit to make that stay put while you pull in the second section of the gaff and create that gap. Okay, same story here. Make sure you're leaving some space there for it to fold without stressing out the sail fabric. Nice compact bundle.
To unfold the sail and spars, we just reverse the process of folding. Line up the sections in a straight line, slide the joints together, and secure the sail strings to the clam cleats at the end of the boom and the top of the gaff.
And that's the story. That completes our video on how to mount the sail on the spars, put on the mast slide, rig the sheet, rig the halyard, and how to fold the sail at the end of the day. Thanks for watching.